Our next speaker is here to shed a light a little bit on how does a project get to be a year late. Jutta Eckstein is, in her talk, Increasing Productivity by Uncovering Cost of Delay, will present some simple tools and methods of uncovering hidden costs. She is an independent coach, consultant, and a trainer, and she helped many teams and organizations worldwide make this jump into the agile transformation and transition. So welcome to the stage, Jutta.
Thank you so much. It's a great honor to be here, and this is really pride. I don't know how she did this without sunglasses and how actors are doing it. I have no idea. Yeah, welcome. It's great to be here. Okay, here are my slides. This is good. So very often when I think about my journey, then my journey is really much covered in the books that I wrote. They kind of show my transition in what I did. So I started off, actually I didn't want to go so far back, but now I started that sentence. So I started off in '97 with XP. So before that I was already in that business, so you can tell I'm not young. I looked into scaling Agile in around 2002 and wrote my first book also then about that topic, about scaling Agile. That's the Agile software development in the large. I published that in 2004. And you can imagine hardly anyone was interested in that topic at that time. So it wasn't what people really struggled with and so on. And then the next thing for me was that the product I was working on, they were not only large, but also distributed, and therefore this was my next topic then. And then I moved on to more looking at what hinders teams in being successful, which is most often inside the organizations, and therefore I looked more into, can we use retrospectives on the organizational levels, and also what's needed for company-wide agility. That's my latest work at the moment. However, what I really want to talk about today is also covered in a book. As I said, it seems that's what I'm doing. Whenever I discover something, I write about it and I publish it because it helps me to reflect on what was my learning. And that was one that I co-authored with Johanna Rothman, and it is on cost of delay. And I want to start off here because we are talking about increasing productivity when we think also about cost of delay. I want to start off with asking you, do you see that? Yeah. Asking you what comes to your mind when you hear increasing productivity. Thinking of your day job, whatever it is, as a leader, as a developer, as a tester, as a product owner, as whatever your role is. What comes to your mind, and just put it down in like a few words, what you think of increasing productivity. And I need to, well, on the one hand, give you a bit of time to answer, and on the other hand, see if it's updating as well. So maybe, yeah, okay, let me see. Okay. I see it's not updating, therefore let's go there. Okay. So efficiency is kind of the big thing. Motivation is also one thing that I see. Working smarter, doing more in less time is what you're coming up with. I see pressure, working harder. Did I say that? That sounds more value, better focus, decrease waste. You're really great. It's so quick. Can you read it? Over time is what I see. Increase output, more efforts. Is there anything else that I miss? Quality is stress. I didn't see stress before. So what we see it's standing out right now is efficiency, really, motivation, focus, but also velocity. Haven't seen that before, but it's also kind of big, and doing more in less time. That's kind of what I'm seeing. Okay, you can still bring it in, but I will see that we keep going. Let me see. Okay, yeah, that's what I saw. Okay, thank you. So if we are talking about increasing productivity, then we need to know how productive are we right now, and do we really increase it? So we need to measure it, really. And therefore, I want to start off with talking a little bit about metrics here. And metrics, for me, is always something that's kind of a difficult topic. If you think of metrics, then definitely what they do is they try to make something transparent. For example, they try to make transparent what is our productivity, right? Now, the problem with transparency is if there is no trust, then it's perceived as control. So transparency is only helpful if it goes hand in hand with trust. And if there is no trust and it is perceived as control, I guess everyone has experienced that at one point or the other. What's happening then is that we just tweak whatever we are measured about to make those measurements look nice. Because we know we are controlled according to those measurements, and it's not our idea to make that thing transparent. That would be different if we would have trust in it. It would also be different if we came up with these measurements and we want to know, like, or I want to know how to get better with whatever, maybe exercise more, or maybe it is the productivity in terms of what I develop or so. But if somebody else comes up with what is it we should measure Jutta on, then probably I do whatever I can to just make those measurements look nice. And I just want to share one example that I have seen in one product development. There was, for whatever reason, the Q&A learned about, well, we are now, and this team is now working with unit tests, and so they thought, and that was a silo, the Q&A, so that was in a different department. And so they thought, oh, this is great. We use that to measure the quality by saying, how do the unit tests increase in relation to the code that increases in terms of size? And what people did then, they just delivered tests over tests which all said assert true, true. Well, that didn't prove anything about quality, but the measurements looked nice. So this is what I mean. So if we are not believing in how we want to get better, and therefore what would help us to measure, then probably all metrics are not helpful. So trust is one element of it. Looking at the next thing, that was also one thing that was standing out when I asked you what comes to your mind when you think of increasing productivity, which was velocity. It's a typical measurement that we are using in the agile world. It's based on all kinds of things. It varies from team to team. Some teams are measuring story points, others are measuring stories or tasks delivered. However, no matter what it is, it never says anything about productivity. velocity really has nothing to do with productivity. And now, why is that? Actually, it is based on also one of the things that I saw when I asked you about what comes to your mind about increasing productivity. It is that velocity doesn't show anything or say anything about delivering more value. It just says something like, we are finishing stuff, whatever that stuff is. So, and again, however we measure them, tasks, stories, story points, whatever, but it's never, at least hardly ever, attached to how much value does this story provide, how much value are those points or those tasks or whatever. So again, it's not really about productivity. It's more meant to, and well, there are long discussions, do you really need that or not, which is a different discussion, but the idea of velocity, if you will, and thinking about all these story points is more about protecting the team, that the team is not committing to more than it can do. But it's not like we are productive here. So if we don't want to work on stuff, then we really want to work on outcomes. So the thing is that we need to have outcome over output. And this is sometimes much easier said than done, because what it really means is we need to know what provides what kind of value. And it's much easier to say, although that's also not easy, but it's easier to say, like, how long something takes, how difficult it is to do, or whatever, than saying how much value it will provide. And that question has to be answered not by the developers most of the time. So other people need to know that. So product managers, product owners, the client, the market, any stakeholders, so the business side knows about that. And if you think about that, the value we are delivering is what makes us productive, and we often forget about thinking about the value and more about complexity and stuff like that, then you could even think of maybe that one principle that we have in the Agile Manifesto should be restated. And a late colleague of mine has done that once when we had the late-hour discussion around that topic, and he was saying successful customers are the primary measure of our progress. And I think he got it right. So it's not how much we deliver and what we are doing, but is how successful can a customer be with what we have done. That's marking the value, really. Okay, let's, for now at least, assume we know the value and we still want to be more productive, want to know like where we stand right now, what can we do in order to be more productive and provide more value. Then we start measuring maybe the average cycle time, which focuses on the development aspect. So we have something in our backlog which is in to-do, and then we start working on it. It's in whatever your pipeline is there. It's in progress till it's done, and it's in the hands of the clients. So this marks kind of that time marks like how long does it take for a value from where we have thought we are working on it till it's really in the hands of the clients. And this on average, and if we can reduce that average cycle time, then we are more productive. So this does make sense, at least to me. Now, this is helpful. However, most of the time, this is not the time where we are creating or losing a lot. So we are not really losing time during something that's in to-do, in progress, and then to be done. So we most often lose way more time before it's actually in to-do, before we start working on it. And this is why we need really more a value stream. So we need to look at what is actually happening with something that we should work on at one point in time. And so how this value stream looks like, and bear with me, you can label it in various ways, and I just did it kind of on a more general level, and it is actually based on real data from a client of mine. So what you see here is that horizontal line, which is an arrow. Well, I should say point it this way because the arrow goes this way. And you see above the line, there is time that somebody has worked on creating that value, versus below the line is nothing is happening with creating that value. So it's not about above the line, people are working, below the line, they are not working. That's not true. It is like looking at the value and what's happening to that thing in order to be created and delivered, right? So people might do other things while nothing happens with this value thing. And now if you look at this, so it starts like a very short peak that somebody is submitting that request, however that happens. So it might be somebody has discovered something in the market. Maybe it is a client who says, well, I really would need this and that. Maybe it's a product manager having a cool idea, or a stakeholder, or maybe a developer. So somebody has an idea about what value we should work on in order to make the product better. So that's what I called here, submit a request. Very short peak. Then we have, I think, like 4 weeks of nothing happening. Again, this is really based on real data, and I know it might look different for you. Then there is a kind of a approval, at least in that case, that was just 1 hour, where just people had time to look at this and say, well, yeah, that's actually valuable. Maybe we should think about this further and look at it. Then we have another 1.5 weeks of nothing happens. Then there are 2 weeks of what I've here labeled as gather requirements. You can, again, you can label it in any way. So it's about thinking, what kind of epic is it? Where is it affected in the product? What kind of stories might hide in that? How do we maybe need to change the architecture? What impact does it have on whatever? So understanding better what is it about. And then again, we had here 6 weeks, nothing happening. Then we had a 1 hour of customer sign-off. Again, whatever that is, it could be the stakeholders saying, oh yes, let's do that. It could be really a client because they will pay for it, or whoever that is. What you see here is that almost 12 weeks, almost 3 months have gone, and the thing is not even in the backlog. And again, it might look different for you, but what I bet is also in your space, most of the time wasted and lost is actually before it's really in development. And therefore, as important the average cycle time is, and we can really work on that to reduce it and to make it better, it's more likely that you can gain more productivity by looking at the value stream. That's much more likely that you can increase productivity, find where time is lost, and so on. Now, okay, we have created value. We have a great product now. We've delivered it to the client, or in the market, or wherever. And then The question still is between us being more productive or not, and this is a question I believe we hardly ever ask, is, are these new features really used? Do you know what's used by your users, clients, customers? And if it's not used, then it means it does cost us still time. It's reducing our productivity, because when we are adding other features, it might be in the way. We still need to maintain it. We have to have the test for it and all of that. So sometimes the thing is about increasing productivity by learning what's really used. And maybe you have heard that, so there are also probably, it's also in terms of some jokes that are around, but it's also kind of a saying that if you think of one of the products that's maybe used the most, I don't have data on that, it's just my guess, which is Word or something similar. From Word, people say that it's really about 20% of all the features that are available are really used. It can do much more, but we are not using it. But it still comes with all that stuff. And so the question is it really needed or not? And maybe it's more waste and not really making us productive and so on. And therefore, what you really need to look at way more is what's used, which requires a different kind of, well, either monitoring or tests really to find out what is it that's used, and then also reducing that stuff. That makes you also more productive. Okay, so that was all about metrics, what to measure. Now, I want to look into analyzing costs of delay. And for costs of delay, well, there some people, and maybe I want to ask that, who read Reinertson's book on flow? Anyone? It's also hard to see here anyway. So Donald Reinertson has written a book on flow. It's not too long, but it's a bit ago when he did that. And the book is really great. It is an eye-opener in like what can be done in really having flow in any kind of product development. However, it's also a super hard read. So on the one hand, I recommend it. On the other hand, I also understand if you say like, oh, maybe I'm not finishing it. And based on that book, Johanna and I have really also worked on that topic because we found like we want to make it more practical. And she came up with, I think, a really great definition about what cost of delay really is. And it is the way to think about the revenue you can lose plus the cost of continued development. So the revenue you can lose plus the cost of continued development. I want to look into the latter one first, so the cost of continued development. And maybe you have seen this before, but maybe it helps you to get this together with like, okay, that's actually cost of delay. And it is also a real example, maybe not nice, but still. And it's about limiting work in progress. So what you see here is really from a team, and so different bars. At the lower part of any bar, so the lowest stack for, I know I have to be careful here, for some people it shows in red, but I know not for everyone. So the lowest part of the stack shows what's in to do. The middle part shows what people are working on, so what's in progress, and so which is in yellow for maybe most, I don't know. And on the top, for some people in green, it shows what's done. And what you see on your left is the big problem that a lot is what people are working on. And sometimes we have even managers or leaders who say, well, it's great because people are busy, they are working on stuff. But this is, let me go back. This is the revenue you can lose based on continued development, or the cost by continued development. This is what you see here in that yellow part. The team started to really work on that, and you see that that middle part of the stacks is shrinking and it gets smaller, so this is good. It's still, even at your right-hand side, I think it's not really good enough, so they still have a way to go. But they discovered that this is something important, and you should ensure that whatever you have in progress should be as less as possible, because that's your cost you're creating. Now, to the other part, which is the revenue you can lose. And a key thing to that is multi-projecting. Multi-projecting is really delaying your return on investment. And I use a very, very simple example. So what you see in this example, it is 3 projects or features or products people are working on. And at the top, there is, well, and each of them takes 2 months. And because there is no prioritization, people are just working on those in parallel. And by doing that, and based on the idea that each of them takes 2 months, and we just make it simple, and they take 2 months, you have a revenue after 6 months. The revenue after 6 months for all 3 projects. Okay, maybe that's good, but maybe you're losing revenue, actually, thinking of the cost of delay, because you're working in parallel. And so what's really needed is having a prioritization where you work first on the first project, so you have a revenue already after 2 months, right? And then you work on the next project, and you have revenue after 4 months, and after 6 months, again, you have the revenue of all the projects. And bear with me, this is just like everything goes well. Everything is fine, because it's very likely that if you work on everything in parallel, it will be later because of the task switching that's going on, but we just simplified it here, and we are assuming that, well, it takes the same amount of time, but even if it does take the same amount of time, what you are having is you have a cost of delay because you are not delivering. So you're losing really money because there's no revenue. There's a little bit more on that. Well, I said already, probably it will be delayed because also the task switching going on. There are several things I want to say about task switching. And first of all, there are studies out there who say, like, task switching reduces our productivity by 30%. So this is one thing. So it's already, the data is out. If we work on parallel on stuff, we are 30% less productive as if we would focus on only one thing at a time. That's the one thing. The other thing is that, well, if you work in parallel on stuff, it just means nobody has taken the responsibility of prioritization. And the prioritization is pushed to the people really implementing the thing. And maybe, only maybe they are not the ones who really know what has the highest priority based on the value that's provided. Because we said before, what kind of value, what kind of thing is really providing is probably something developers can't answer, but the business can answer. Now that if we are asking a team to work on everything at the same time, and maybe it is some people put more pressure on the people than others, then this is what creates the priority and not the value. So the multi-projecting, multitasking is maybe the thing, well, which happens on the team level, but on the other hand is more created from the business side, is actually the thing that decreases the productivity quite a lot and is a huge cost of delay. I want to stay with the prioritization, but focusing on something a little bit different, which is experts. So very often we think of experts, well, this is great because they can do the stuff much faster. And therefore, well, if we have a specific topic to get solved, then we know, well, Tom really can do this in a very fast way, and therefore it would probably be better if he does it versus if somebody else is working on it. That is true, and if something happens to what's on the stack of Tom's work, then it might mean, again, that prioritization really is ignored. So what do I mean with that? If you look at these arrows, so these are piles that are piling up for our different experts, piles of value we want to create. So let's assume we know that this is value, it's not stuff. We also have prioritized it, and we have experts who can really deliver that fast. So there are piles for every expert. And then in the middle, you see that that pile really became long. Why? Because that expert faced some challenges, and therefore something takes longer than expected, and things are piling up, piling up. Now, what's happening based on that is that the other 4 people, they are working on things that have actually less priority than the things that are on the long pile of the one in the middle. And this is what I mean with, like, if we are having experts, maybe the one thing is solved faster, but overall, whatever we have talked about in terms of prioritization is meaningless. So we can also stop prioritizing if we work this way. So what we need really is that we have only one line where everything is, so like the sprint backlog or whatever, even if you work like Kanban or whatever. And then we have people, again, no matter if you're working in pairs or ensembles or whatever your style is, they just take the stuff in priority order, so we are really creating the value according how it's prioritized. And it's not piling up because, well, that thing can only be done by whoever. Now, I also know, at least these are the products I've been working on, I also know that it's really tough to say, like, everyone can do everything. It is something which would be probably great, but depending what you're working on, that's, well, again, in my world, it's hardly possible. So what we typically do is that we say, well, we have like a given limit, and the given limit most often is something like this, that for every topic we are working on, we have at least 2, better 3 people on the team who can work on that topic. It's never a 1, never ever. It's 2 or 3 people who can work on that topic. And then we also have it the other way around, that everyone on the team is not only able to master one thing, but again, also 2 or better 3. And this way we kind of broaden the knowledge about different things in the team. Again, we are not expecting everyone knows everything, but we also know if we have only one expert who knows that one thing, we are doomed, because prioritization is actually ignored, right? And so spreading that knowledge, we all know, is an investment, but it's an investment that pays off. And we have to make that investment, again, for increasing our productivity. Now, maybe this is even related. I just thought it's a different topic. Let's see if you find it's related or not. I want to talk a little bit about quality. And the one thinking about quality is, if we pile up our technical depths because we don't have the time to work on it because there's always something else more important, delivering more features, then this decreases our productivity because the system is too bad to really put in new stuff in quickly, creating more value quickly. So technical depth is kind of the one thing we can also work on in the development team to reduce our cost of delay. Now, this is super important. However, I also see other things happening, and it's really not the one or the others. It's having both in mind, because I've also seen teams who were thinking about quality, but thinking of it in terms of gold framing everything. The question is, how much quality is needed for you to keep working on the product? How much quality is actually asked for by the user, the market, the client? And then what is it that you will be able to invest in the quality? So these are really the important questions here. So you need to know what are exactly your customer needs and what is your maximum investment for that thing. And it might mean, well, you would like to have it in a higher quality, but if nobody pays for it, maybe you're thinking too much in terms of gold framing, and maybe it could also be true, you're right. So I said it's not an either-or. So we don't want to have technical depth, but we also don't want to have gold framing. And actually, I really have seen in both ways companies running out of business. I have seen them running out of business because their products were growing as so bad because of the technical depth that they couldn't maintain it. And I have seen companies thrown out of business because they hardly delivered anything, because they always felt like, oh, we need a bow here and some gold plating there. And so you can do both to the extreme. And my point is, you need to be aware of both things and then do what's requested, being aware of that. Okay, so, now I think I'm getting into trouble. Let's see how I'm getting into trouble. So, getting started is a problem that I actually really often see, especially in Scrum teams. So, there is that thing that people sometimes like to do when they have a new product to work on, that they start having a sprint 0, and very often I think, well, it's more an excuse for not getting started, because you can always start with the really minimum functionality and still learning and putting your infrastructure together. And sometimes I see like, okay, the sprint 0 is really about stuff again. And you might perhaps agree with that, but I fear a bit, or I'm scared a bit, what you say about that other thing, which is another thing that I see that teams are often not getting started. And again, it's particularly in Scrum teams. It could also happen for Kanban also, but most often I see it in Scrum. It's that the teams have a definition of ready. And the way, when I think it's problematic, is that I see them working with the definition of ready in a way that, well, let me first, no, I need to roll back, sorry, rewind. First, quickly, what is the definition of ready? It is whatever we are working on, let's say a story, is in a shape that the development team says, we understand it, it's good enough for us getting started and implementing that story. So everything that we need to know is there, and so it's described in a way so we can get started. And now back to how I started. So the problem that I'm seeing there is very often that, well, there's a story coming to like the team in the sprint planning, and then people say, well, this is not according to the definition of ready, and so we are pushing it back to most often the product owner. You have to do some rework on it and make it ready according to that definition. The problem with that is actually we are in that all together. It's not that the product owner sits on the other side of any kind of wall where we throw that story over, and so that these people or that person is working on it and then throwing it back. If the story is not according to the definition of ready, and we can't start working on it, what we need to do is we need to sit together and work on it so we all understand it. So it's not the responsibility of like one person, it's our joint responsibility to understand it, and it's part of implementing it. Getting a better understanding of what's requested is part of it. And yes, it could sometimes mean that we figure, well, maybe we should have a survey in the market again, or ask a specific client about that. So, but that could be our joint decision that this is what's needed in order to implement it. And it's not a pushing it back, because again, in an Agile team, we actually work together. And it's not that the responsibilities are completely separated. It's also not that the product owner is a complete expert in one field. It's the whole team ensuring we know the value that needs to be created. And so now, I don't know, maybe you don't like me anymore, that I don't like the definition of ready, at least not if it's implemented this way. I have another topic which is perhaps even the most important of all of those, and it is taking time to really improve. Because sometimes we know what's not working well. Maybe we know that we have too many experts that are actually bottlenecks, but we are not doing anything about it. Maybe we know that, well, the business features, stories always have a higher priority than working on technical depths, and therefore we will not get better in productivity. So despite our knowledge, we still need the time for improving things. We need to take that time. And this is just, the picture that I'm having is just one example of a saying about that. There are several ones. I share like 2 or 3. So this reflects, we don't have time to sharpen the saw because we have to saw. And that's most often the kind of the thing that I'm hearing. There's also a similar one that goes with an axe, that, well, we don't have time to sharpen the axe and so on. I've heard in Texas they sometimes say we don't have time to build the fence, we have to chase the cattle. So all of these are reflecting that we feel we are too busy to take time to reflect, to learn, to improve, to get better. However, in the end, this means we are getting slower and slower over time, and therefore this is maybe the most important thing, because very often I believe we know what the problems are. We might maybe even know how we can solve those problems, but we just don't do it because we are too busy. And therefore, the taking time to improve is probably most important here. Okay, so this is most of what I have about, well, the metrics, cost of delay, analyzing it, how to get better. Now, there's a last thing I want to point out, which is sometimes I feel like people think the framework they are using is preventing them from really creating revenue. It is that cost of continued development that still sits here because of the framework used. And one of them, probably the one that's used most often, is Scrum. I guess all of you have seen that picture in this form or another form. So we have to your left your backlog, and then things are putting into the sprint backlog, and we go through a sprint, we have a daily Scrum, and then there is the potentially shippable product increment. Now the way this looks here is like, this is only happening, well, once we're done sprinting, or once the sprint is over, or the sprint has broken up, or anything like that. But I come back to that. And I want to first share another picture you might have never seen, which looks a little bit chaotic, but this is actually where I'm coming from. Maybe I'm a bit chaotic, who knows? Which is the picture about extreme programming. This is how I started with Agile, with extreme programming in '97, I believe. And here we have, I know it's pretty chaotic, however, the thing is that we also have here at the end acceptance test and some approval and then small releases. And you could also argue, you see in red, there is the iteration, which is like a sprint, and then we have all those various development practices that play a role here. However, you could also argue, as in the picture before with Scrum, that maybe it is once we stopped iterating, or once an iteration is done, or anything like that. However, in both cases, that is not the case. It's not true. So nothing in whatever method framework you're using hinders you from shipping once something is done. So you don't need to wait till the end of a sprint in order to ship. Because if you do, what is it? You're having the cost of continued development. And therefore, you have a cost of delay here as well. So that's also not kind of an excuse. Okay, I want to wrap up. So, in essence, what you have seen is that whatever you are measuring, whatever kind of metrics you are using, without trust, probably those metrics are completely meaningless. Because we will always manage to tweak them in a way so that, well, they look good, but they are not measuring anything real. So if there's trust, then this helps us already to get better. Then the other thing is, it's not important to measure stuff. It's important to know what creates what kind of value, and then measure how we are creating that value and getting more productive in doing that. Again, just having any story points piled up or anything, that's not the important thing. And then you can start analyzing and eliminating your cost of delay. So these are kind of the three things in essence. And maybe there's another thing, which is a quote by Jasper: you have to release it, or no one can use it, and you can't realize any revenue at all. So that was kind of the thing. Don't let the framework hinder you in releasing what's ready and of benefit to the user. Sometimes it's not of benefit right now for various reasons, but sometimes it is. And now I wonder because you started off in such a nice way, if I should share something completely different, but it's really also to my heart, which is an afterthought that I'm having here. And the afterthought is, as important as this all is, what I just shared, and I think it is important if you are working in an agile way, however, agile won't matter if we are not doing anything about climate change. And maybe your cost of delay analysis needs to also consider if we are delaying that cause of change. And therefore, sustainability has to be taken into account, for example, in the acceptance criteria, like any other quality criteria, and also, for example, the definition of done should think about how inclusive or resource efficient are actually the products that we are using. It actually is related to cost of delay, but I know it's a slightly different topic, and I think it's important enough to keep it in mind and being aware of it. So, I leave you with that afterthought, and I am curious about the questions you're having. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jutta. I really like the afterthought, so thank you for sharing with us. Maybe we can jump into the question. We have some questions from Jovan. What are some useful metrics for measuring outcome?
Well, first of all, what you need to have is estimating the value. And estimating the value should be done by the people who know the business. And it could be done, so I have done it also in terms of like money, what we expect to come in, so the revenue that we are expecting from developing these stories, or sometimes we also just talk about like, what do we think, what value is it creating, and we sometimes use something like planning poker, but it's not about what we are thinking, how long it takes, and it is with the business people thinking about what value it creates, and then come to an agreement like this is maybe a size-based thing, like we expect this feature to bring in, I don't know, let's say 50K euro or something, and this is our agreement, and once that is then done, then, well, we can measure it. So still based on a story, but we know for every story what is the value, which again I think is way more important than kind of having an idea like, well, how long do we think it takes, or what complexity it is, and so on, because the priority according to the value it creates is more important.
Thank you. From Anna, how to react if a new company executives want to introduce their metrics to teams that are still going agile?
So that probably, if I understand it right, thinks about like somebody at the top, like the execs, coming up with any kind of metrics and then hoping things are improving. Well, the thing is, you need to talk to them and say that, well, most often they are not stupid and they have seen this before and they have probably played those tricks themselves, because they got measured according to something somebody else made up for them, and you can tell them, look, what we think, in order to get better, we need to measure, well, the value we are creating, and therefore we need to first know what is the value that sits in a specific story, and not kind of measure whatever they think they need to measure. I don't know, maybe they want to measure lines of codes or amount of unit tests or something like that. So the best thing, I believe, for everything like that is, first of all, explaining why the thing that they are suggesting might not lead to the objective they have in mind, and then offer what the team thinks will lead to that objective. So it's offering a metric that you know that helps yourselves, and yourself is the team, to improve. And I just believe everyone wants to improve in the end. However, not according to somebody else's metrics, but to our own metrics, what we think is important.
We have one from Nevena. How would you create a value stream and have it transparent and measured for the issues that are still not in the team's backlog?
That is talking to people that are actually not in the development team. It's really, it is about thinking, it sounds stupid, I know. I am a request. I am something that ends up in our company, and then looking at what does it go through. And of course, you do this by talking to the people, and it could start by talking to the people who are in the frontline support, or it is talking to stakeholders who come up with something. So it is the easiest, I always think, is if you are on a development team, then you go backwards. So it is something is in the backlog, and then you ask, like, where does this come from? And then you go back and back and back, further back, till you are at the source of where this came from. However, most likely you need to have some authority to also talk to those people. But if you say, like, well, we really want to know how to get more productive, maybe then people are open for everyone to talk about this. But the main thing is really, again, kind of how to. Well, you go backwards from the backlog till you come to the place where it was filled in. And then probably it would be good to measure a few other things where once you know where stuff is coming from, and just look at what's happening with that thing to validate your data.
Maybe on that measurement side, we have a question in how difference in story sizes complexity affects cycle time metrics.
Well, I start with that I'm not sure is it really super important, because it's really more the value. Then the other thing is, which is for me more a Kanban answer, that we should try to have everything in kind of the same size. And kind of means it's all small, it's all stuff that's not for a long time in development, because remember, this is where we have the cost of continued development. So we want to size it small so it can be done quickly. So size does, of course, affect it well, but it depends how long of a period you're measuring. You know, if you would measure your average cycle time over a 1-year period, probably it levels out completely if you are having like huge chunks and small chunks. But it's always better for you if you have small sizes, because then they are almost the same size, and you don't have those costs of continued development. And again, the thing is, how long is the period you're measuring?
I see here we have one last question, and also time for one more question. If we are thinning the line for definition of ready, team could get confused why they're working on unfinished stories. How to engage them and the team to work with a PO and help of reaching definition of ready?
Well, actually, my impression is this question is like the second part of the question is already kind of the answer to the first part of the question, because they will not work on unfinished stories because they work together with the product owner to make it finished according to the definition of ready. And the key thing is to understand that it's our joint responsibility to deliver those stories. And delivering means really the whole process from what some of you might still know from the old days where people were thinking about analyzing it, designing it, implementing it, testing it, and then delivering, which all happens kind of at the same time and by the same people now. And it's still not so, and that's probably why I have that huge problem with definition of ready, because it seems it pushes us back to the waterfall process, where we say, well, there are those people analyzing the thing, which is the product owner. No, we are all doing it. So if we would do it in a waterfall process, then yes, but we are not, we are agile. And in agile, all these waterfall steps are the responsibility of the whole team and not of a single person, and no matter what the role of that person is, also not of the product owner.
Thank you very much, Jutta, for being with us today.
Thank you.